In this video, I intend to look at the heritage protections that exist in the four nations of the United Kingdom: England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. This includes the protection legislation that exists and also international protection that is enjoyed by historic sites in the UK. A lot of this protection dates from the early post-war period. During the Second World War, the Luftwaffe obviously destroyed a lot of heritage in Britain. And then after the war, as I mentioned in my conflict video, there was further destruction by town planners as they used the destruction of areas of towns and cities by bombing or damage to historic buildings as an excuse to completely redesign. This video does skip about between talking about heritage protection bodies and also talking about heritage protections such as listed building status. I upload content twice weekly, so please like, share and subscribe for new content as it becomes available. The first legislation, according to the UK Parliament's website, I will include a link in the description, was the 1882 Ancient Monuments and Protections Act. The 1882 Act arranged for guardianship of 50 prehistoric sites. It also appointed an inspector of ancient monuments. The early 20th century would see further acts passed, with even more after the Second World War. The Italian Country Planning Act of 1947 was created, where you had a system of listings for buildings that were considered to be of special historical, architectural, or cultural importance. However, this did not stop listed buildings being demolished throughout the 1950s and 60s. What it did do was mean that these places now had statutory obligations of care and conservation. In 1968, the Planning Act meant that listing was more vigorously enforced, but it still does not guarantee that a listed building does not get demolished. There was a further act in 1983 which set up bodies for the three nations of Great Britain. These are English Heritage, Cadw for Wales, and Historic Environment Scotland. With devolution at the close of the 20th century, the Welsh and Scottish bodies passed the control of the regional governments. For reasons I have not been able to ascertain, there is no equivalent organisation for Northern Ireland. It might not have the portfolio of historic sites that the other three nations have, although the Republic of Ireland does have a similar body. There is also a similar body in New Zealand, and I believe Malta also has a body. In addition to government organisations, the UK also has independent charities such as the National Trust, established in 1895. Although not a government body, in 1907 the first of a number of acts was passed which gives the National Trust a certain amount of autonomy. So therefore, if something does belong to the National Trust, it does actually have more protection than would generally be the case with a completely non-government independent charity organisation such as that. The Scottish version, the National Trust for Scotland, dates from 1931. With the establishment of English Heritage, Cadw and Historic Environment Scotland, you now have these departments doing two jobs. One was to look after the historic sites previously cared for by the Department for the Environment, and before that the Ministry of Works, in the three nations of Great Britain, obviously depending on which one you're in as to which maintained it, but also to administer and regulate the listed building system, including issuing listings for buildings and other structures, as well as also issuing grants to help in their upkeep and maintenance. In England, English Heritage was actually split into two, with that element being given to the organisation called Historic England, whilst English Heritage still looks after the historic sites. Listed buildings come in England into three classifications: Grade 2, Grade 2 star, and Grade 1, depending on the importance of them. And obviously, the higher the classification, the harder it is to demolish them, and the more important the building is considered to be. There are different classifications in other nations. I know Scotland has a slightly different way of categorising it. It is the English system that I am familiar with, as I have worked for the Historic Monuments Commission for England, now split into Historic England and English Heritage. Listed building status, however, does not guard 100% against demolition. This is still allowed to take place if you can prove that the new development is of sufficient value that it is worth more than the listed building, even to the level of Grade 1. This happened in the early 90s to the old Matham Webb building at number 1 The Poultry in the square mile of the City of London. A Grade 1 listed building was demolished controversially for that purpose. Even where Grade 1 listed buildings have survived, such as the St Pancras railway station, also in London, some of the alterations that were made for it to accommodate the Eurostar terminal were a little bit controversial. Another lost listed building was the Baltic Exchange, which was extensively damaged by an IRA bomb in 1992. And after standing derelict for some years and passing through different owners who wanted to redevelop the site and were told no, eventually the site was redeveloped, and it is where the Gherkin, one of those skyscrapers that now dominate the City of London, is now located. There have been instances where, rather conveniently, listed buildings have burnt down so that they are now considered beyond economic repair, and then consent has been given for their demolition. There have also been cases where, a few hours before the listing was due to come into effect, buildings have been demolished. I have even heard stories of people claiming that buildings in their locality got demolished simply because there was the possibility they might have become listed, rather than have to face them owning a listed building, especially if you're a property developer. In Grays, in Essex, not far from where I grew up, there is a 1930s cinema called The State, which is a filming location in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. When they're hiding in the cinema, that is where they filmed it. Around that time, it was given listed building status, initially at Grade 2, because it went through the hands of various people who wanted to redevelop the site. I understand it has since been upgraded to a Grade 2 star rating, but has for many, many, many years been on the Buildings at Risk register. It hasn't actually been operating as a cinema for about 35 years, but until about 25 years ago, it was still in use latterly as a nightclub, but has now been basically standing derelict, or getting more and more derelict, for the last 25 years. Of course, what should happen is the local authority should, by rights, be going in and carrying out emergency repairs and billing the owners of the building. But the local authority are not carrying out their obligation because the local authority actually don't want it, and it would suit their purposes if it just simply fell down or got to the point where it was beyond repair, and Historic England then agreed to its demolition. Also, if you make alterations to your listed building without getting listed building consent, the Historic England can force you to restore it. This includes putting back brick by brick a listed building that has been illegally demolished. Of course, this doesn't really preserve the heritage. The reason for this is to act as a deterrent so that people won't do this in the first place. Often, if alterations are made to listed buildings, there is a requirement for them to be reversible. This can include, for example, putting in temporary partitions if you're making a space that was a wide open space into smaller units so that it can all be removed. In some cases, if you are given permission to remove certain features, these are not allowed to be thrown away, but have to be placed into storage for the duration in that you require it in this form. so that at some point in the future, when a further alteration is made, those features can be reinstated. One example I can think of this concerns the theatre near London's Victoria Station, which for about 30 years was where Starlight Express was being performed, and they actually, to put the set in, had to remove certain features, which obviously will now have gone back as that production has since ceased. Another form of protection the UK has under its 1913 Ancient Monuments Act is scheduled ancient monuments. Probably the most famous one in the United Kingdom is going to be Stonehenge. All of this is in addition to international protection such as UNESCO, the United Nations body that looks after heritage. There are a number of UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the United Kingdom. These include the Stonehenge landscape and Hadrian's Wall. In another video, at some point, I will probably look at heritage management. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this, and as I say, please like, share, and subscribe for more content as it's uploaded week by week.